Disappearance at Sea, the Carroll, a Deering story. The ocean doesn't keep secrets, it swallows them whole. For every ship that makes it to port, another battles the waves, and some just vanish. They become legends, whispered on the wind and tide, ghost ships. Now the most famous of these is the Mary Celeste, but there's another story just as chilling, just as complete in its mystery. It's the story of a magnificent 5-masted schooner found wrecked and deserted. Its sails were still set. A meal was on the galley stove, but its crew was gone, erased from the world. And this isn't some work of fiction. This is the true story of the Carroll A. Deering, the ghost ship of the Outer Banks. What happened to the 12 men who sailed her? For over a century, the answer has been lost to the waves, locked in a mystery that involves mutiny, pirates, and the strange, dark forces of the sea itself. January 31st, 1921. Through the mists of a stormy dawn, a surfman on watch at Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, spots an impossible sight. A colossal 5-masted schooner, driven hard onto the treacherous Diamond Shoals. Its sails are fully, eerily set, as if it's still under command. But no one is at the helm. For days, violent seas keep anyone from getting close. When rescuers finally climb aboard, they find a ghost ship. In the galley, pots of food sit on the stove, a meal prepared for a crew that is nowhere to be found. The captain's cabin is a mess, but the ship's log, its navigational tools, and every single one of its 12 crew members have vanished without a trace. Where did they go? What could make an entire crew abandon their ship in the middle of a meal? The answers lie somewhere between a violent rebellion and the depths of the ocean itself. To really get the mystery, you have to understand the ship. The Carroll A. Deering was a marvel of her time. Launched on April 4, 1919 from the G.G. Deering Company yards in Bath, Maine, she was one of the last great wooden schooners ever built. A 255-foot, 5-masted behemoth, she was made for the rugged world of commercial cargo hauling. Outfitted with oak, mahogany, and ash, she was even considered luxurious for a cargo vessel, with some accounts claiming she had features like electricity and steam heat. The owner was so proud, he named her after his son, Carroll Atwood Deering. This wasn't just a collection of planks and sails. She was a testament to a fading era of maritime craftsmanship, a powerful vessel designed to tame the world's oceans. Her final voyage began on August 26, 1920, leaving Virginia with a cargo of coal for Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. At first, the ship was commanded by Captain William H. Merritt, a celebrated hero of the Great War. Just 2 years earlier, Merritt had saved his entire crew when a German U-boat sank his previous ship. His son, Sewall, was serving as his first mate. But shortly after leaving Virginia, Captain Merritt fell gravely ill. The Deering had to turn back, putting into port in Delaware to leave both Merritt and his son behind. The G.G. Deering Company needed replacements, and fast. They found their new captain in William W. Wormel, a 66-year-old retired sea captain, a veteran of the waves coaxed back for one last trip. As first mate, the company hired a man named Charles B. McClellan. With a new command structure and a crew of 10 men, mostly from Denmark, the Carroll A. Deering set sail once more on September 8, 1920. The trip down to Rio went off without a hitch. The coal was delivered. But under the surface of this routine journey, a dark current was beginning to form. While docked in Rio, Captain Wormel gave his crew shore leave. During this time, he met up with an old friend, a Captain Goodwin. In their conversations, Wormel didn't hold back about his new crew. He complained about their unruliness and said he deeply mistrusted most of them. The one man he claimed to trust was the ship's engineer, Henry Bates, whom Goodwin also knew. But his main source of frustration? His own first mate, Charles McClellan. The Carroll A. Deering left Rio on December 2, 1920, stopping for supplies in Barbados. It was here that the tension simmering on the ship boiled over for everyone to see. First mate McClellan got drunk at the Continental Cafe and was overheard openly trashing Captain Wormel. He griped about the captain's skills, his inability to navigate without his glasses, and his constant meddling. Even more chilling, one crew member was overheard making a direct threat, saying he was going to get the captain before the voyage was over. McClellan was arrested for his drunken tirade and thrown in jail. In a move that was either merciful or just practical, Captain Wormel went ashore, bailed his first mate out, and brought him back to the ship. But the damage was done. Wormel wrote to Captain Goodwin telling him he was having trouble with his crew and just had to grin and bear it. He was worried a mutiny was brewing. This stop in Barbados was a critical turning point. It left a clear paper trail of the bad blood between the captain and his second-in-command. When the Deering weighed anchor and left Barbados on January 9, 1921, bound for Virginia, it sailed under a cloud of suspicion and barely contained hostility. The seeds of mutiny had been planted. For nearly 3 weeks, the Carroll A. Deering sailed north, fighting the Atlantic's winter storms. Then, on January 28, 1921, the ship was spotted by the Cape Lookout lightship, a floating lighthouse off the coast of North Carolina. What happened next is one of the most crucial and bizarre pieces of the whole puzzle. The Deering hailed the lightship, and its keeper, Captain Jacobson, noted the strange exchange. A man on the schooner's deck used a megaphone to shout across the waves. He reported that the Deering had lost both of its anchors in a storm off Cape Fear, and asked Jacobson to notify the ship's owners. Jacobson logged the message, but his own radio was down, so he couldn't pass it along right away. But it wasn't just the message that was odd. It was the man who delivered it and the whole scene on the Deering's deck. Jacobson described the man with the megaphone as tall, thin, with reddish hair and a foreign accent. This was definitely not the 66-year-old Captain Wormel. In fact, Jacobson noted the man didn't look or act like an officer at all. He also saw that the crew was milling around on the quarterdeck, a part of the ship where the crew wasn't normally allowed. That was the officer's domain. Not a single officer was visible on deck. This was a huge red flag, a profound breach of maritime discipline. It suggested the normal command structure had completely fallen apart. Someone other than Captain Wormel was in control of the ship. The very next day, the log entries, which had been kept in Captain Wormel's handwriting, were suddenly written by someone else. The day after that, the steamship SS Lake Elon passed the Deering and noted it was steering a strange course. Something was clearly deeply wrong aboard the Carroll A. Deering. It was sailing like a ship without a master, a prelude to the discovery that would soon shock the world. At dawn on Monday, January 31, 1921, surfman C.P. Brady stared into the gray morning light. There, caught on the edge of Diamond Shoals, was the Carroll A. Deering. The shoals, a network of shifting sandbars off Cape Hatteras, have been a sailor's nightmare for centuries, earning the area the grim nickname, the Graveyard of the Atlantic. The sight was deeply unsettling. The Deering was stuck fast, getting pounded by breakers with all her sails standing. Her decks were awash with waves, and from a distance, she looked completely abandoned. But the weather was far too violent for rescue ships to even try to approach. For 4 agonizing days, the Coast Guard could only watch as the Atlantic battered the helpless schooner. Finally, on February 4th, the seas calmed enough for a boarding party to make its way to the wreck. What they found has been the subject of intense speculation ever since. They boarded a ship that was both eerily normal and terrifyingly empty. The 2 lifeboats were gone. The ship's logbook, chronometer, and all other navigational gear were missing. The crew's personal belongings were gone too. But in the galley, the scene was frozen in time. Pots of food were on the stove, as if the crew was in the middle of preparing a meal when they just left. The only living souls aboard were a few half-starved cats, including a distinctive 6-toed one. The physical state of the ship only created more questions. The rudder was broken, and the steering wheel was shattered. This suggested either a violent struggle or straight-up sabotage. The ship's anchors were gone, just as the man on the megaphone had reported. But it was a scene that made no sense. Why would a crew, even in an emergency, take the time to gather their personal belongings and the ship's vital records, yet leave a meal cooking on the stove? It was a hasty departure and a methodical one all at once. The 12 men of the Carroll A. Deering had stepped off their ship and into thin air, leaving behind one of the greatest maritime mysteries in American history. The discovery of the abandoned schooner sparked a media frenzy and launched an investigation of a scale rarely seen. The mystery of the Deering wasn't just local news. It became a national obsession. 5 separate U.S. government departments were thrown at the case: Commerce, Treasury, Justice, the Navy, and the State Department. And overseeing the massive effort from the Department of Commerce was a man whose name would soon be known around the world: Herbert Hoover. Hoover was personally intrigued, especially because the Deering wasn't alone. Several other ships, like the sulfur freighter SS Hewitt, had also vanished in roughly the same area at the same time. Hoover put his ambitious assistant, Lawrence Ritchie, in charge of the investigation. Ritchie's task was monumental. He had to build a story from almost nothing. His team tried to chart the Deering-ES final days by reviewing the logs of every Coast Guard station along its route. They searched sailors' boarding houses and shipping registers, desperate for any whisper of the missing crew. But it was like chasing ghosts. The Coast Guard tried to salvage the Deering, but the ship was too badly damaged and stuck in the sand. On March 4, 1921, it was declared a hazard to navigation. The Carroll A Deering was destroyed with dynamite, its wooden hull blown to bits. With the main piece of evidence now in fragments on the ocean floor, the investigation had to turn to theories and speculation. The government was facing a blank wall. No bodies, no survivors, no wreckage from the lifeboats, and no distress calls. There were only the chilling facts of an empty ship and the deafening silence of 12 missing men. The deeper investigators looked, the bigger the mystery got. It's a story that pulls you in, a puzzle with a dozen possible answers, but none that fit perfectly. If this mystery is pulling you in the way it pulled us in, we'd be hugely grateful if you could hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and click the notification bell. We have so many more mysteries to explore together. Now, with the ship gone and the investigation in full swing, the federal government had to consider every possibility. Where could the crew have gone? Let's get into the theories. The first and most enduring theory was mutiny. The evidence for an uprising was pretty compelling, and it all started long before the ship hit the graveyard of the Atlantic. The conflict began with that last-minute crew change. You had Captain Wormel, an old-school sea captain, and his first mate, Charles McClellan, a man with a clear problem with authority and alcohol. The public arguments in Barbados were Exhibit A. McClellan's drunken complaints and the alleged threat to get the captain established a clear motive. Captain Wormel himself was afraid of it. He'd put his worries in writing to his friend. This wasn't just speculation, it was documented tension. Then you have that bizarre scene at the Cape Lookout lightship. The man on the megaphone wasn't an officer. The crew was on the quarterdeck where they shouldn't have been. This points to a total breakdown of the ship's hierarchy. It strongly suggests that by January 28th, Captain Wormel was no longer in command. The fact that the final log entries were in an unknown handwriting seems to confirm it. Someone else had taken control. The physical evidence on the wreck also fed the mutiny theory. The shattered steering wheel could easily be a sign of a violent struggle. In the end, Herbert Hoover and his lead investigator, Lawrence Ritchie, concluded that mutiny was the most likely answer. The story seemed to fit. A disgruntled crew, led by a belligerent first mate, rises up against their captain, seizes the ship, and then, what? This is where the mutiny theory starts to fall apart. If the crew pulled off a successful mutiny, why would they abandon a perfectly good, valuable ship? Usually mutineers take the ship, not desert it. And if they did abandon it, where did they go? They would have left in 2 small lifeboats in the middle of a vicious winter storm. It sounds like suicide. One captain at the scene believed the crew looted the ship and ran her aground on purpose. But that just leads to the same question. Where did they go next? Mutiny explains the conflict, but it doesn't explain what happened to the mutineers. If not mutiny, maybe the crew fell victim to something else. Pirates. In the early 1920s, piracy wasn't entirely gone. More importantly, it was the dawn of Prohibition, and the East Coast was becoming a hotbed for rum running. The Deering, with its huge cargo hold, could have carried a fortune in illegal liquor. So, was the crew involved in a smuggling deal gone wrong, or were they attacked by criminals? This theory blew up on April 11, 1921, when a fisherman named Christopher Columbus Gray came forward with a message in a bottle. The note inside was a desperate plea. It read, Deering captured by oil-burning boat something like chaser. Taking off everything, handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over ship, no chance to make escape. Finder please notify headquarters Deering. Suddenly, the mystery had a story. The bottle was proven to have been made in Brazil, where the Deering had just been. And most convincingly, Captain Wormel's widow identified the handwriting as that of the ship's engineer, Henry Bates, the one man her husband had trusted. The message seemed to confirm the sighting of a mysterious steamer seen trailing the Deering. The idea of a pirate attack, maybe even by Bolsheviks as some papers wildly speculated, took hold. The FBI was now hunting for a phantom pirate ship. But just as quickly as the theory appeared, it collapsed. First, there were problems with the logic. Why would a crewman writing a desperate note ask the finder to notify company headquarters instead of the police? Then the whole thing unraveled. Investigators discovered that Christopher Columbus Gray had forged the note. He hoped the fame would help him get a job at the local lighthouse. Handwriting experts backtracked on their initial assessment, and eventually, the lead investigator tricked Gray into a confession. The message in a bottle was a complete hoax. And with that, the piracy theory lost its only piece of real evidence. While some still think rum runners could have been involved, there's just no proof. A slow, obvious sailing vessel like the Deering would have been a terrible choice for smuggling anyway. The theory was dead in the water. Maybe the explanation wasn't sinister at all. Maybe it was just tragic. The waters off Cape Hatteras are infamous for a reason. The graveyard of the Atlantic is where violent storms can appear with terrifying speed. We know for a fact that a series of powerful hurricanes had just swept through the area. This leads to the simplest theory. The crew abandoned ship in a catastrophic storm. One of the first Coast Guard captains on the scene, a veteran named R.L. Gaskell, dismissed all the talk of mutiny as so much newspaper bunk. He offered what he saw as a logical explanation. He argued that after the ship lost its anchors, it became uncontrollable in the storm and ran aground. Facing 90-mile-per-hour winds and waves like mountains, the crew had a terrible choice. Stay on a wrecked ship that could break apart any second or take their chances in the lifeboats. For Captain Gaskell, the missing lifeboats were all the proof he needed. In such a sea as this, he stated, the crew of the Deering manned their lifeboats and tried to make shore 9 miles away. It would have been a futile effort, practically suicide. No small boat could have survived those waters. The crew would have been swamped and lost almost immediately. This theory explains the missing crew and the missing lifeboats in one simple, tragic move, but it struggles with the other strange details. If you're panicking and abandoning a ship in a hurricane, why would you take the time to gather your personal belongings and the ship's log? And the biggest question of all, why would the ship be found with its sails fully set? Standard procedure in a storm like that is to furl the sails to keep the masts from snapping. Leaving them up makes no sense. The calm scene in the galley with a meal cooking also doesn't fit with a panicked evacuation. The storm was definitely a huge factor. But the simple abandonment theory doesn't quite line up with the evidence. When logic fails and evidence disappears, people often turn to the supernatural. And in the world of maritime mysteries, no force is bigger than the Bermuda Triangle. The legend as we know it wouldn't fully form for a few more decades, but the Carroll A. Deering would become one of its founding stories. The Triangle is a loosely defined area of the Atlantic where countless ships and planes are said to have vanished. The Deering's final voyage took it right through the western edges of this notorious patch of ocean. For many, the sheer weirdness of the crew's disappearance was enough to link it to the Triangle's reputation. The idea that some paranormal force just plucked the crew from the deck offered an explanation, however fantastic, for the complete lack of any trace. Newspapers, books, and TV shows have all enthusiastically pushed this theory, cementing the Deering's place in supernatural lore. It is, however, a theory on shaky ground. For one, the Deering was wrecked off North Carolina, hundreds of miles from the core area of the Bermuda Triangle, and official investigators have always dismissed any claims of the supernatural. Most incidents blamed on the Triangle have later been explained by severe weather, human error, or were just flat-out exaggerations. The Bermuda Triangle theory provides a convenient, otherworldly answer to an impossible question. It plays on our fascination with the unknown, but without a shred of evidence, it remains firmly in the realm of folklore, a tantalizing but ultimately empty footnote in the official investigation. And the theories didn't stop there. Investigators considered other possibilities, each with its own problems. Could the Deering have collided with another ship, like the SS Hewitt, which also vanished at the same time with its 42-man crew? This might explain the lost anchors. But if they collided, why did the man on the Deering only mention lost anchors, and not a catastrophic collision? Plus, no wreckage from the Hewitt was ever found. There were even whispers of a Bolshevik plot to hijack American ships and sail them to Russia, a theory that was popular in the press, but had zero proof. The official investigation, led by Ritchie and Hoover, eventually ground to a halt. After nearly 2 years, they had nothing definitive. In late 1922, the investigation was officially closed, with no formal explanation ever given for the disappearance of the crew. The case went cold. We're left with the same questions that haunted investigators a century ago. Why was the meal left on the stove? Who was the mysterious red-haired man on the deck? Why would a crew pack their bags but leave in such an apparent hurry? And the biggest question of all, where did 12 men in 2 small lifeboats go? The ocean is vast, but to disappear so completely, without a single body or piece of wreckage ever washing ashore, is almost statistically impossible. The sea, it seems, had swallowed them whole. The story of the Carroll A. Deering is a perfect mystery. It's a tapestry woven from human conflict, the terrifying power of nature, and the allure of the unknown. Each theory seems plausible, right up until it smacks into a contradictory piece of evidence. A mutiny explains the conflict, but not the abandonment. A storm explains the wreck, but not the weirdness on board. Piracy explains a violent takeover, but is based on a proven lie. The Bermuda Triangle explains everything and nothing at all. For more than 100 years, the fate of Captain William Wormel and his 11 crewmen has remained one of the sea's most profound secrets. The ship itself is long gone, dynamited into splinters with only a few relics, like its bell and possibly its capstan, surviving in a museum in Hatteras. They serve as a tangible link to a story that has otherwise passed into legend. The ocean holds the truth locked deep within the graveyard of the Atlantic. The Carroll A. Deering is more than just a ghost ship. It's a timeless reminder of how thin the line is between a routine voyage and an eternal mystery. The men are gone, the ship is gone, and all that remains is the story and the endless unanswered question. What happened to the crew? What do you think is the most likely explanation? Let us know your theory in the comments below.